Delighted to welcome you all here. Welcome to Davos. Welcome to this important discussion. We are at 50-year anniversary of the invention of the internet, and as of December, 50% of the world are connected. At the same time, of those that are connected, 45% of people believe that technology will make their lives better. We face a number of urgent questions. Technology can clearly bring great benefits to society, but we need to understand also the challenges, address the challenges. This is part of an ongoing stream of work at the World Economic Forum. Much of it is summarized in a paper produced with the input of many of the esteemed panelists here and others, which is available on the app and online attached to this session. I'd encourage everyone to have a look. With no further ado, I'll hand over to our great moderator, Victoria Espinel, and enjoy the next hour.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks to everyone for joining us. This is a fantastic panel. So I'm going to start off by just very quickly going around the room so you know who all is here, but I don't think we could have a better group of people to have this conversation. So starting here, Rajeev Suri, who is the CEO of Nokia. To my immediate left, Ken who is the Deputy Chairman and rotating chairman of Huawei. Immediately to my right is Abidali Neemuchwala, the CEO of Wipro. Eileen Donahoe, who is currently at Stanford, but has a background that spans public sector. So she was a UN ambassador to the Human Rights Commission. She's also has done stints in civil society as well as in the private sector. And Al Kelly, the CEO of Visa. So thank you very much to my panelists for being here today. I'm very excited about the conversation that we're going to have. So I think, one thing that there's a lot of conversation around Davos and around the world is about the rate of change. And so this panel is about the digital economy. I think it is inevitably true here. Digital technology, economic progress, social outcomes are all changing very, very quickly. I think one of the interesting conversations is what are the connections between those two things? Because in some ways, there's clearly the rate of change is accelerating in terms of the digital economy, in terms of economic progress, and in terms of social outcomes. But are those things connected, or are there places where they're becoming more decoupled, and we're seeing tension between technological progress and economic development, or technological progress and positive social outcomes? And all of that comes back to and is highly dependent on the digital economy and what happens in the digital economy. So that's the conversation that I want to have today. It's a broad topic, so I'm excited about where the discussion is going to go. I'm going to start off by asking each of my panelists to speak briefly to the following question. The theme of Davos this year is Globalization 4.0. I think one of the things that we really need to understand is how Globalization 4.0 is going to be different than what has come before it. Because unless we really understand that difference, it's going to be impossible for us to address the challenges that come from it. So I'm gonna start with Ken. And then go around, but I'd like to hear from each of our panelists what you are seeing in your world. What are the most critical changes and differences and shifts that you see that are going to make Globalization 4.0 look different than anything that's happened before?
Yeah. So thank you very much, Victoria, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here for this fantastic session, because I know this is one of the most popular sessions in the WEF every year. And it's a great opportunity to join the discussion regarding the digital economy. And I highly agree with you, Victoria, that the digital economy is driven by the digital technology. So today I would like to take this opportunity to share some of my observations on what's going on the technology side and how the technology will help us to make the change. So firstly, I believe that in this year could be a big year for technology, because many of the technologies are reaching the tipping point. For example, the IoT has been widely used, and artificial intelligence is playing a significant role in our daily lives and also many industrial applications. And even the blockchain has already expanding beyond the traditional in cryptocurrency market. Of course, in this year, the 5G will be the biggest market in technology. The technology is ready, and the business is in a faster growth. So according to the GSMA, by the year of 2025, we will be able to see 5G deployed in 110 countries. And at Huawei alone, in addition that we have deployed 5G networks in more than 10 countries, we will expect to deploy the 5G network in another 20 countries in the next 12 months. And yeah, the smartphone is very important, it's critical. So the 5G smartphone will be ready in the market in June of this year. So I'm pretty sure that many of you will use the 5G smartphone when we get together here for the annual meeting next year in Davos. So 5G is ready, 5G is coming, and 5G will bring every one of us great benefits. So for consumers, we can expect the 5G to help us to build the brand new mobile broadband experience. So let's imagine with the 5G as a consumer, we can watch the football game from the perspective of the players in the field. And with 5G, we can easily download a high definition movie into our smartphone in just a second. So that's amazing. And for industries, 5G will also play a significant role in the digital transformation. 5G can help us on smart manufacturing, autonomous driving, remote surgery, and etc. So those are the great benefits we can expect from 5G. And I do believe that even beyond that, 5G will bring a lot of strong features which can be the strong enabler for many, many new disruption in our existing business. Another shift I've already observed is that given the big context of the globalization 4.0, given the process of the development of the digital economy, I believe there will be more and more focus on the, from the, business benefit that technology can bring to us to the social, value that technology will bring to us. So we've seen many, many successful references in the world around us every day to use the digital technology to help people solve the problem like the shortage of the food supply, like to help the people with disability, and to help more and more people to get access to the banking service. So as a member of the digital industry, I'm so proud of that. And I do believe that for any of the technological innovation in our business operation, they will only be meaningful when they can help us to make the people's life better. So I believe that WEF has provided us a great platform to explore the technological innovation, to explore the business value and the social value that it can bring to us. So I'd love to share my opinions and reference with all audience.
Yes, so I think social impact is critical. So I definitely want to make sure we come back to that. Abidali, what are you seeing in your world?
So, coming from an industry where there has been a lot of benefit from what I would call as, we never termed it as such, but globalization 3.0 or 2.0, where almost generating 25 years back and globalized services industry in the IT services space, where in a country like India, about 7 million young people have been provided high-skilled employment and a effect of a multiplier of 3 or 4 over there. When I look at globalization 4.0, I think there are 3 things that I think it'll be different in. Number one, it'll be much more human-centric, or it needs to be much more human-centric. Just as an example, we talk about artificial intelligence and the impact that it has on jobs and people. I think reskilling of the workforce. I think there are tons of other activities and jobs that people need to do for which our workforce is not ready today. And businesses and government investing in reskilling people so that we address the anxiety that comes with globalization 4.0. I think the second thing is on inclusiveness. We need to be much more inclusive overall. And I'll just give you an example of Wipro. As we globalize, as we are locally recruiting across the globe now, because globalization 4.0 is different from having mobility of people from one place across the globe to hiring, for example, locally. Today, in the US, we would hire about as many people that historically we would have hired in India. Of course, if we can get all the STEM talent that we need from the campuses and colleges out there. So overall, that needs the ability for businesses to be able to assimilate culture. For the first time last year, I appointed a chief culture officer in the organization, which can handle this globalization with a higher level of inclusivity. And we've started a program called Culture Works, which just helps and sensitizes people to be able to work together across diverse cultures, absolutely, around the world. And the third aspect is it being sustainable. Because one of the things that we realized in globalization 3.0 or whatever is definitely it created disparity. There was a level of anxiety and angst that we see across, coming through the political system, coming through the socio-economic system, and I think it needs to be much more sustainable. And apart from being much more localized while we globalize, I think it needs to make sure that we provide opportunities to people where in the long term, the disparity that globalization 3.0 had created is much less. And I think there's a lot of stuff where there could be a much more positive narrative around the societal benefits of globalization 4.0 along with technology that we can talk about.
You said localized while globalized, and that's a concept that I love. Rajeev, let me turn to you. What do you see as the big changes that are coming?
A couple of things will be different. Number one, this next industrial revolution, globalization 4.0, it will address the productivity paradox. So today we have appalling productivity because these third industrial revolution technologies, data centers, mobile internet, smartphones, all these things, social media did not really address productivity. They didn't give us more time. And so if you look at just the US as an example, it's about the digital economy. We have two economies in every country, right? There's the digital economy, there's the physical economy sitting side by side. The digital economy in the US has had about 2.7% productivity per annum. The physical economy has had about 0.7% productivity per annum. The digital economy naturally got 30% of the economy, but it's 70% of the ICT investment. So I think the first thing is it will address the productivity paradox. And of course, 5G and the fourth industrial revolution will underpin that. And I believe that there will be a tipping point at some point where this productivity starts to meaningfully increase. And we think for the US, it's going to be in 2028, so starting about 2028 to 2033, where it will be sort of a very fast rise in productivity, because there will not be the digital haves and digital have-nots. And we're not going to sit here and talk about ICT as a notion because everybody will be digital. And we think when there are four sectors of the economy, digital health networks, digital transportation networks, digital energy networks, and digital manufacturing networks, i.e. 5G and these fourth industrial revolution technologies go to these sectors underpinned by a digital communications network, that's when you'll get that tipping point. And then I agree with what Abidali, you said, that it will be local because the nature of 5G is going to be such that computing will be decentralized, data will be decentralized. You will have to provide these services that you talked about within 100 kilometers of the users of these services, whether that be for industry or for consumers like us. Because virtual reality and these sort of closed-loop automation technologies need that close distance. So from a world where it's been global cloud, centralized systems, you'll go to decentralized systems, decentralized data, decentralized services, decentralized computing. And I think that will provide this global local thing that you talked about as well.
Interesting. Eileen?
So I would highlight as the big trend that I see is this dramatic swing in the pendulum from optimism to pessimism about the effects of digital technology on society and on people. So we've seen an erosion of trust among citizens that they will be the beneficiaries of digital technology. And I would also highlight the erosion of confidence among governments, especially democratically oriented governments, that they can fulfill the promise and live up to their obligation to simultaneously protect the liberty and human rights of citizens, the security of the society, national security, and protect democratic process. That combination, all while they're advancing economic growth. I think that there's a loss of confidence in the feasibility of doing all those things simultaneously. I think everybody in this room has heard the term techlash, which in 2018 was shortlisted as one of the Oxford Dictionary's terms of the year, words of the year. Here we are, January 2019. For us, it's already a cliche that there's been a techlash. I live in Silicon Valley, and it's very, it's an old term at this point. I see two big strands of discontent in this techlash. One is about economic inclusion. That has two parts. One is people don't have confidence that they will partake in the economic upsides, that they will, that the benefits, the economic growth and benefits and the wealth are going into fewer and fewer hands. And so the wealth distribution challenges we've had pre-digital, we now have on steroids. The second part is the labor issue and the concern about massive labor displacement. And even people who have confidence that in the long game, we will get there and find a way to machine human interaction, new skills. Everybody senses short game, ugly transition. The second big strand of discontent is almost, I don't know, they compete. I don't know which is worse. Is more about trustworthiness, and I would put that more in the political, civil liberties, human rights, democracy camp. That has three dimensions. One is the erosion of privacy. It's as though everybody has woken up to the reality that digitization of society has gargantuan consequences for privacy. And finally, people are understanding privacy matters to the exercise of liberty. Simple idea is if everything you say and do is tracked and monitored by governments, by private sector companies, it will have a chilling effect on what you feel free to say, where you feel free to go, et cetera. So right there. The second part of this concern is that digitization of everything has made us society-wide, systemically less secure. There is a great sense of vulnerability. Neither governments nor private sector know how to protect our data, our infrastructure, and our identities. And then the last piece everybody knows very well in the last year especially, but last couple of years, is this dramatic concern about cross-border weaponization of information and eroding the ability of citizens to have their say in democratic process, and governments are confused about how to protect. So those are the things we have to address.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
One thing I would say though, I think absolutely agree, and hopefully we can come back and talk about some of the specific elements you talked about under trust of privacy and security, for example. But I think there's a real connection between the lack of trust being driven by some of the economic concerns that are out there. And so I don't see how we fix the trust deficit by not focusing on the economic part.
The inclusion part.
Right, which is not to say the other issues don't need to be addressed as well, but I think inclusion, it's a prerequisite to building that trust
Inclusion,
back up.
trustworthiness is the only way you have sustainability.
Certainly when you're talking about trust in the public sector. For trust in companies, I think that's actually that's an interesting topic that I want to see if we have time to talk about today as well, because I think that that balance has really shifted as well. But Al, let me go to you next and last in terms of how globalization 4.0 will be different, and what are the big changes that you're seeing?
Thanks, Victoria. Look, I think improving the world moves the world, connecting the world, I should say, improves the world, it moves the world, it actually shrinks the world. And I think there's three big factors. One is clearly innovation, and a number of my colleagues have touched on it. And it's not just the fad of the day. You got to be actually trying to solve real problems, reduce friction. Second is partnerships. It's hard for any one company to do, or any one government to do everything on their own, and I think we all have to be embracing working together, and I know at Visa that's a big deal for us. We can't get anything done without a village of partners, and it's critical that, in fact, partnership becomes a bigger deal going forward in globalization 4.0. And picking up on Eileen's point, I think customer citizen centricity is critical. We've got to keep the citizen, the consumer, at the focal point of our thinking in everything we do. And I do think we've started to see some changes. I mean, the reality is that for the first time in 2018, the middle class is now greater than those of people that are in poverty. And I think globalization and technology and urbanization have started to lift people up. And the trend is that by 2030, we'll see upwards of 2/3 of the people around the world in the middle class. The other thing that's happening is people are increasingly meeting in cyberspace. The realities are that e-commerce is growing 4 times that of bricks and mortar. Content is available on demand. Subscription models are exploding. In the last 60 seconds, Amazon shipped almost over 1,100 packages. Uber enabled almost 1,400 rides globally. Visa processed 350,000 transactions in the last 60 seconds. So it really is happening, but we've got to do this in a way that keeps the customer and the consumer and the citizen at the center of our thinking.
So I want to talk a little about inclusiveness, because that's come up in a few different ways already. And I think it's really important, the discussions that we're going to be having here all week at WEF. So I would love to hear from the perspective of you all, where you sit, what you think are the most important things that you can be doing inside your companies, or for others, using digital economy technology to try to improve and increase inclusiveness in a real concrete way.
So, we've been thinking about this quite a lot, and one of the things which we've realized is, as a leader of the firm, we look at inclusiveness and how we can impact our employees, because you start with employees and winning their trust. And we found 2 things which have worked quite well for us. One is the larger purpose of the organization, which is beyond business. And we're very fortunate that we're able to impact, through our foundation, about 300,000 public schools, and provide help with education of some of the most underprivileged kids over there, and how that helps with driving overall inclusion. And the second thing for the employees, which becomes a very important criteria when we ask young people why they join Wipro, the number 1 reason is the purpose of the organization. And the number 2 is the investment in reskilling and initial training and reskilling. And I think that's worked very well for us. Especially in education, I'll take an example of how it drives more inclusion, is enabled by technology, essentially. What we found is, while directly using technology for education, and I'm talking about primary school education, there's not a direct correlation there, but in enabling teachers who help primary school education, making them better teachers, especially in the public schooling system, is through creating a peer network of teachers, and teachers learning from each other. Now, this concept existed always, but the ability, and here now, if I talk about some remote areas of the world where people are dedicating themselves, teachers are dedicating themselves to teach some of the most underprivileged children, to be able to empower them through technology, and now technologies like 5G and others would enable that more and more, of creating a peer network by using some very simple technology tools like social media and Facebook for them to become better teachers, are things that have worked very well. We've provided some ability to agriculturists and fishermen to be able to get the price democratization, or they being able to understand and taking the middlemen out of, once they fish in the sea, before they reach the jetty, right, they know which jetty to go to, because what is the price that they can command, which earlier, if they reach a jetty, they used to sell it to a middleman based on the price that the middleman decides. So I think enabling that inclusion is helping create a positive narrative.
It's good for consumers too.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned starting with employees, and the Edelman Trust Barometer came out yesterday, and one of the things I thought was interesting in it is that companies actually scored the highest on trust, more than any other institution that they measured against, including government. and as a sort of specific level of detail on that, for employees specifically, 80% of employees said their CEO was the institution that they trusted the most, more than government, more than civil society, more than any other institution. And what went with that is that they then wanted their CEO to be a leader. They wanted to be hearing from their CEO what their CEO believed, both in terms of the business product of the company, but also kind of beyond that. I thought that to me was surprising. I thought that was a very interesting learning from it. Although I think in thinking about it, I think it also resonates with the way that you see many CEOs and companies acting today. But your comment on starting with your employees, I think it is a great example of that. Rajeev, would you talk a little bit about how you see that from the perspective of Nokia?
From our perspective, Nokia, I echo what you said, Abidali. So, I mean, people increasingly are joining for a purpose. What is the larger purpose of the company? And they're staying for culture. So I spend a lot of time on culture. I've written the cultural principles myself, and we want to deploy it throughout the organization. And the other thing is that we want to use digital and digital technologies ourselves for reducing complexity. So we want to declare war on complexity, war on waste, but literally sort of take out complexity, simplify employees' daily lives. And
what's an example of that? Is that like taking out the middleman, the way Abidali was talking about, or?
Yes, lifelong learning, so constantly reskilling, using the notion of human augmented intelligence. So take the example of factory worker. Today's factories that are not digital, they're not digital because these machines and systems and devices are wired. So that means you can't actually repurpose them, reprogram them, and sort of move them around, and it's not simple. So the reason of deploying AI and 5G with low latency technologies there is actually simplify their lives. We're not saying we're going to replace the factory worker. The factory worker will be a lot more empowered because these things will just become wireless. Moving enterprise IT from a focus on Wi-Fi being used as the connectivity technology to 5G, because we're moving to operational IT. We're looking at all our assets and saying, how can we connect these assets together and get a lot of value out of them, predict what these devices will do, et cetera. So I think it's about reskilling, but purposefully, knowing that there will be disruption because of AI and data and all of this. There will be disruption. There will be change in occupations. We don't think that jobs will necessarily reduce, but occupational changes will definitely happen. But knowing that upfront, and working on it, reskilling, providing continuous learning opportunities, because now more than ever, lifelong learning is an absolute must.
I want to come back to that awareness, because I think that's actually one of the things that's going to be really different about globalization 4.0. But Al, you talked about putting the customer in the center of everything, and privacy and security have come up a few things. One of the challenges there is the customers want a lot of different things, right? Customers want convenience, customers want privacy, customers want security. How do you put all that together? Is it possible to have it all, or do customers need to make choices?
No, I think it is possible to have it all. And if I look at what we're trying to do, we're trying to create ubiquity around the world. Anywhere you go, that you're able to transact commerce, whether it's buying a good or service, or selling such. Secondly, we want to make sure we're reliable. What people need to be able to depend on our products and our services, and they need to be secure. The most precious asset is the one Eileen touched on. The most precious asset in the digital economy is trust, and individuals need to be able to trust. I also, by the way, think trust underlies a very important part of financial inclusion. I think a step before financial inclusion is financial literacy, and people who don't have any knowledge of the mainstream financial systems aren't born into the world understanding how money flows and how money is made and how they actually get access to money. And all of that people need to be educated so that they build up a trust. So I think consumers deserve all of those things. They deserve a product that works. They deserve a product that is secure. They deserve a product that they can trust in and out every single day, every single hour, every single second. And it's something that I know we're maniacally focused on every single day of the week.
Sorry, Rajeev, were you going to jump in there? No. So for that maniacal focus, I'm sure all of you have that in how you run your companies. How does that manifest itself? Is that in your security networks? Is that in how you're training your workforce? How do you make that a reality?
So one of the examples I will give, and we're a B2B business, but still winning the customer's trust. For a CEO, the most difficult thing becomes, especially in this age of technology transformation, is how you cannibalize your own revenue. When the customer says, aha, so this is not going to be necessarily good for your business in the short term, but in the long term, you're thinking about the customer first. I think that makes trust real with customers. And in our example, one of the toughest things that I had to do over the last 2 years or so, we do a lot of infrastructure management for enterprises of my colleagues sitting over here. And that is moving to the cloud, that is getting automated with artificial intelligence and stuff like that. And it's a significant revenue stream for us. If we go proactively and talk about how we need to do it, and at least personally, I realized that while the CEO can talk about it, you need to change the whole incentive system and the DNA, and as Rajeev mentioned, the culture across the organization to be able to become customer-centric. And at one point, I had to divest a significant part of my revenue to make it real for our own employees, other than customers, to be able to see that we really are thinking about the customer, even in the short term at the cost of the enterprise. And of course, then you have to learn as a CEO the trick of communicating that to the analysts, because quarterly results and markets are a reality that every CEO deals with. So I just thought I'll share a personal example on that.
That's great. Ken, I know, have been thinking a lot about social impact. Do you want to talk? And you mentioned it a bit a few moments ago. Can we come back to that? How are you thinking about it?
Sure. I'd love to talk about that again. I believe that while we are talking about digital economy, while we talk about the globalization, the next round of globalization, I think the social value we can create should be part of the key considerations. Because the purpose of the digital economy is not just to pursue the economic growth, but to make sure that that growth could be inclusive, could be sustainable. And we, as the technology provider, we do have the opportunity to identify the challenges that we're facing in the society, and we do have the capability to use our technology to solve this problem. So, for example, the shortage of the food supply in the world is a big challenge for us, and we will have a lot of discussion here in Davos this year. And let me share with you one of my own experience. When I was a little boy, I had a wish. I wanted to eat the rice every day. However, that's impossible back then in China. Why? Because at that time, the production of the rice in China was very limited, very limited. My family has 4 persons, and we were only allowed to buy 2 kilogram rice per month. So as a result, we were able to eat the rice every weekend. So today, when I talk this story with my kids, it's pretty hard for them to understand. But for me and my parents, this is a really unforgettable experience. Yeah, fortunately, the situation has been greatly changed by technology. Yeah, last summer, I visited a city called Qingdao. Qingdao is very famous for the beer, but I didn't go for beer. I visited the farmers in Qingdao. Actually, the farmers were using sensors, Internet of Things, and big data analytic to recover the soil with too much salt for rice growing. Actually, that's the soil they couldn't use before. And with this solution, from my calculation, in China, we were able to recover the unused soil for the usable farmland by 5%. So China is a big country. So with those actual farmland, we were able to provide sufficient food for 80 million people in our country. So that's 10 times the population of Switzerland. I'm sure that for all of us here today, it's no problem to have the rice every day. However, we should be clear that according to the United Nations, nowadays, there is even 900 million people in the world suffering from the shortage of the food supply. So I do believe that we can help them with the technology. And this is just one of the examples in the agriculture industry. So I believe that we can expand the power of the digital technology to many different sectors. By working together, we can repeat this successful story in every industry, in every countries.
So let's talk about what we need to make sure happens so that we can repeat that success story. And I also want to talk a little bit about kind of the narrative that's around that, because one of the things, you talked about techlash, one of the things that I certainly see in my world is that there is a great level of concern. I think someone's already used the word angst on the panel, and there are legitimate concerns out there to be addressed. But there is also enormous progress. So, as a specific example of that, and there were 7 times more people in the world today than there were in 1820. But if you look at the number of people living in poverty, the absolute number has gone down from not the percentage, but the absolute number has gone down from 1820, notwithstanding that we have 7 times more people that live in the world today. If you look at economic measures, education measures, even some environmental sustainability measures, there has been progress. And yet it often feels like there is a very negative narrative in the world today. And it is good to continue to remind all of us that we need to continue to work to make things better. But sometimes negative narratives can start to weigh you down. There's, the failure is a feeling long before it becomes a reality. So I think it's also important that we continue to push past negative narratives, stay focused on what needs to be fixed, but stay focused on what we need to ensure that progress moves forward. And I'd love to hear thoughts from the panelists on how we not let the negative narrative inappropriately overwhelm discussion and how we continue to move forward on the positive. How do we stay focused on moving forward?
I think I want to come back to this decentralization of computing, and the whole notion of 5G is going to be this decentralization, because the benefit of 5G for many industries like you talked about is basically low latency, what we call high responsiveness, low downtime. You press a button and things happen quickly. This is mission critical for industries. So given this localization of data, decentralization of computing, analytics, AI, et cetera. And that will also mean localization of talent. And so I think there is a possibility for us to get this harmony back in terms of, reducing nationalism, because there will be much more focus on local economies in this next generation of technology, which we call the 4th Industrial Revolution. And of course, it has to work as a seamless whole. Doesn't mean that globalization is going away, but there is the potential to bring power back to local economies, I think, with this shift.
Localized while globalized. Eileen?
Yeah.
I would add another dimension beyond the economic expansion and expansion of the technology, which is that we need to simultaneously protect citizens' liberty, security, and democratic process along with that economic growth. And so I think a big part of this is we need new governance models. I mean, this is the WEF, the whole big theme of a new governance architecture. And obviously, our globalized, digitized environment is deeply challenging to the post-World War II order. And the simple concept of nation states defined by territorial boundaries. And so we need to push beyond that, and I think that's why we've seen such a shift to the private sector. The private sector has really taken on a lot of governance responsibility. They own, operate, secure much of the critical internet infrastructure for civilians. They set the parameters of access to information on their platforms, those kinds of things. I think we need to expand beyond the concept that they're accountable to consumers or users. They're accountable for the effects of their technology to the larger society. And I think a big part of that accountability is a governance model that brings in citizens and civil society and other stakeholders. So instead of relying on government or only the private sector, you have to bring in civil society, citizens, and it's got to be multi-stakeholder.
So I think it's really interesting how the roles of corporations have been changing. And I think one of the questions around that is, why is that? Is there a failure of governments and so companies are feeling like they have to step up? Is it just an evolution in how CEOs feel about their job? And is it a good thing or a bad thing? Or is it an inevitable thing? And whether it's good or bad is not really the point. The point is, how do we come up with a new governance structure that takes this into account?
I'll just make one last simple point, is I think just the simple idea of globalization means that entities that think of themselves as global actors are much more naturally fit for that environment, where, as opposed to nation states that think of themselves as responsible for people within their territory and jurisdiction.
Just to add, being a member of the tech industry, I think it's just also learning and growing up process. In early 80s, the pharma industry has undergone that, whatever is the equivalent of techlash. Or, if 10 years back we were here, we were talking about the financial services industry having undergone that. I think we just need to be more proactive and learn to deal with how to address that narrative, which doesn't all become just the techlash and the ill effects of technology, but the phenomenal benefit that the society is having from technology.
And ensuring that's happening.
Yeah, I do want to contribute my ideas on how to deal with that. And my point is that, we should think big but act small, and we should try to recover the soil. Yeah, from my perspective, I think we can invest on some fundamental aspects like this development of the skill. Because that's the key for all the societies to embrace the benefit of the digital economy, and that's a joint effort needed across the different stakeholders, from the government, from the industry. Yeah, the government will have a lot of things to do. However, we as the industry can do our own job. Yeah, we can spend our effort internally in our organization to help our employees to enhance their digital skill, and we can help our organization to understand that this is kind of value of the organization, and give the room to the employees to empower them, to inspire them to explore how to contribute on that. So, for example, in my company, we have a program called Seeds for the Future. Yeah, because that's the program where all of our employees in the different countries can figure out, how to cooperate with the local community to help to educate the young generations on the digital technology. So we've been in that program for almost 10 years. We've covered around 100 countries, and 300 students have been included in that program. So I think, the point is that we should do our own job, think big but act small.
So I have so many questions I would like to ask this panel, but I'm gonna not be greedy. I'm gonna turn to the audience for just one or two questions, and then I am gonna take the mic back to ask one more question to the panel. So I'm gonna call on this gentleman first, if you wouldn't mind identifying yourself.
Sure. So my name is Philippe Delorme. I work with an energy company, Schneider Electric. Wanted to connect the dots with the former panel, which was around energy. The data we're gathering are showing that today the IT world is actually driving close to 10% of the total electrical consumption. And all our models are showing that actually within 10 years, that all IT industry, semiconductor, data center, telcos, actually are going to drive 20 to 30% of the whole electrical consumption in the world. My question, so we've talked about the whole cultural change and so on. How do you see energy in that whole digital transition? Is it a big deal for you? Do you have any program to drive down energy or to be more effective with energy? How do you see that?
How?
Well, Visa is a B2B technology company. More than about half of our employees work in technology. About 5% of our workforce works in cybersecurity specifically. And our data centers are our engine room for everything that happens. And we're very, very committed. By the end of next year, we're going to be at 100% renewable electricity in our data centers. We think about it a lot. both for many reasons, what's best for the world, what's best for our cost base, and what does it mean in terms of purpose? You know, we want to continue to improve the world, and that sense of purpose is very, very important to us. And being committed to being smart users of energy is, and smart users of what happens in the environment is just a natural part of the way we do business.
There in the back.
Hi, I'm Francis Rafal from the Global Shapers Vienna Hub. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on inclusiveness. When we look at the reality, I think, of course, we have to retrain people, but the reality is that we probably won't be able to retrain people fast enough. So by the day someone's finished training over 3 or 4 or 5 years, the job we've been training that person might already be gone. So I was wondering, what do you think about the concept of universal basic income that, for example, is financed by an automation tax that will gradually increase over, for example, a period of 20 or 30 years until when everything, like all the basic needs people need, are fully provided, fully automated, that everybody can live without the need to work?
I was going to say, if no one wants to take that, I'd be happy to offer some thoughts, but
Well,
Eileen,
I
want to give my panelists deference.
I don't have a big problem with the idea of meeting people's basic needs. I do think a lot more thought has to be go into the meaning of work in people's lives. And so just by handing over money, I don't think we're solving the problem. Sure. And the sense of disenfranchisement that comes with labor displacement.
I think the dignity of work,
Dignity of
feeling
work.
that purpose in your life is critically important, but people's basic needs absolutely need to be met. Subsistence. Vanessa, Ken?
Yeah, I shared I shared the point with Eileen that we're all aware that the universal income is just kind of experiment in some specific countries, and I don't think it is the right timing for us to figure out how to expand that globally. And get back to your first question, how to do the faster training for the digital technology. I think one of the power we can leverage is the technology itself. Actually, nowadays we have cloud computing, we have artificial intelligence, and we have smart devices in everybody's hands. So you should leverage this technology and change the traditional training model. Yeah, actually, with the cloud, with the smart devices, we can actually make the training on demand, make the training as a service. So you can use it anytime you need.
All right. Okay. Final question. Sorry.
Hi, Vijay Punasamy from the Kwai Group in Hong Kong, which is an e-commerce platform. Just going back on this trust deficit, which we mentioned earlier, who's going to be the first mover to address that? Do we leave it to governments, or should the private sector take the initiative to address the trust deficit, which clearly is growing? Thank you.
I'll just start. So, there are a couple of points of trust deficit. One is, of course, people feeling left behind, and we talked about it in terms of jobs displacement and so on. But the other is privacy, cybersecurity. People value their data. They want to know what are the trustworthy services, what are the untrustworthy services. So education matters there. But I think there it is going to be a coalition of government and business to develop these good privacy and cybersecurity policies that can simply be applied across various countries. Because if you look at US, it's very different from Europe. Europe is GDPR, US is fairly fragmented. So I think the notion of privacy as a human right and the ability to come up with somewhat practical, pragmatic processes with government and business help across the world would be a defining moment if we could start to enable that.
It's the partnerships that Al was talking about.
Yeah.
I'm a little less negative on this trust thing. I think it's precious and we have to protect it. But to me, it's about leadership. And leadership at the top of corporations, at the top of not-for-profits, at the top of governments, taking their job seriously and leading. and giving people something to believe in, and putting the citizen and the customer at the center of all they do. If leaders did a lot more of putting the customer or their citizen at the center of what they were thinking about, we would have logical policy, and I think there would be greater trust. But I maybe I'm crazy, but I tend to be more of an optimist on this than a pessimist. I think we can go through down periods of time, but at the end of the day, if we look at where the world was 50 years ago and where the world is today, it's a much better place. And I believe that will be the case 50 years from now.
I heard a deep and anguished sigh when I said that it was the last question from the audience. I'm going to allow one more question from the audience from the gentleman just there.
Thank you. One of the people listening to this.
Introduce yourself, please.
Pardon?
Introduce yourself, please.
I'm John Stasinski from PIMCO. One of the questions I'm curious about as I've listened to this discussion is really trying to address the elephant in the room, and that is, given this broader discussion that's taking place and sort of the tease between the United States and China, one of the biggest teas in that discussion is technology. And if we look at the United States' approach to certain aspects of intellectual property going forward versus China, and what China's doing, there's obviously a world where the two work together, and there's obviously a world where they're two separate technology worlds. I'd be interested, given the august nature of this panel, how people see those fundamental issues about the technology space affecting what has been accomplished so far, and how that's going to affect this certainly in the short term.
Well, I'll just say briefly, as someone who spent much of her life in public service, most recently serving President Obama in the White House, and now is in technology policy, I think a world in which China and the United States can work cooperatively together, and obviously countries like companies are going to compete and they're going to try to innovate, and that's, I think, good for the world if it's done in a way where there are rules wrapped around it. But a world where we have greater cooperation, I think, is definitely where we want to strive for. Are there other thoughts the panelists would like to offer? And then I'm going to take the mic back.
I can go, but perhaps Ken, do you
Eileen?
okay. Well, obviously, yes, we would like global cooperation. We need global cooperation on this. The one point I would underscore is that even though we need new governance models, the post-World War II structure isn't cutting it right now, we don't need new values. We have enduring values. They have been with us for time immemorial, and we must protect them. And so that's the one part I think we've got to figure out how we continue to protect the core values of liberty, security, democratic process, human rights. At the same time, we do economic growth, and we do that in a global way.
All right, so I'm going to do a lightning round for, oh, sorry, Ken.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, I'd love to share some of my views from the business perspective. And actually, we've seen, the damaging effect on many of the, companies, including Huawei and some of the sectors from the trade war. And as the technology industry, we're highly relying on the global supply chain and the global, innovation ecosystem. So we are probably, suffering the most right now. And we've seen, many companies, taking, quick actions to, deal with this, very tough situation. And my point of view is that just being, reactive is not sufficient, because we are at the turning point of restructuring of the global economy, and we're actually at the turning point to get access to the, discussion of the, new globalization, which is called the 4.0. So I do have some points to share with, the business communities and also the government. I believe that, that's, cooperation, that's a joint effort needed across the different stakeholders. For the government, I would say the government should, understand the business, nature, and should be clear that the current globalization is the result of the, competition and also the cooperation based on the comparative advantage. So it is not the pursuit of any single country for the absolute primacy. So we will have competition, but we need cooperation. And at the same time, the business, community. For the short term, we can react to the existing trade war. For example, we've noticed that many U.S. and China companies adjusted their forecast for earning for the next year. But for the long run, I think for the business community, we should proactively join the process of the definition of the global economy, to join the process of the definition of the globalization 4.0. I will strongly advocate that the business community to voice their opinions to the government, to let government understand the requirements from the business community. Otherwise, I worry that the trends will expand to many, many other industries and countries. So at that time, no matter if global or local, small or large, no matter what sectors are we in, we will be negatively affected.
All right, lightning round to conclude this fantastic panel. 20-second answers, please. I think one of the things that's going to be different about globalization 4.0 is in the same way that technology is driving change so quickly, the same technologies, the data that we have, 5G, our ability to analyze it, means we know what the problems are much more quickly. So the awareness is higher, and I think the level of interest in addressing the problems is higher than it has been at any other point in history. Clearly, there are long-term impacts. I want to ask you all to answer in 20 seconds or less. What do you think today is the most important thing that you or anyone in this room should be doing to try to make sure that we are set up for success? And Rajeev, I'm going to start with you and go around.
Well, personally, as an organization, as Nokia, I want to spread the knowledge of the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution and that 5G will be a critical national infrastructure.
Ken?
Yeah, we'll share my ideas very, simply. The technology innovation will not stop. Technology is good, but we should make sure that technology is for good.
Abidali?
I think business and government should come together and address the trust issue, especially around data and privacy.
Okay. All right, great. Eileen?
I would say that everybody has to gravitate to this concept of human-centeredness, user-centeredness, people-centeredness, and do it through multi-stakeholder process where there is actual inclusion in governance policy development.
Great. Al?
I think we have to become much more conscious of the gender inequity in business. 73% of women-owned firms are not getting the capital they need, and they dominate in terms of the small business. And we're not talking about millions of dollars or billions of dollars. There's $1.5 trillion gap between the amount of money these women need to become true business people. And we've got to make sure that we give them access to that capital and deal with this gender inequity in business.
It's a fantastic send-off. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you.